إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه وخليله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد. We start in praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala an abundant praise, and we beseech Him to send His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his family, his companions, and his followers until the end of time. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. We go through life making different efforts. We go through life working. At a young age, we work at performing well in school. We try to get good grades in our classes. And as we get older, we continue to work. We continue to aspire in getting a certain type of certification or degree. And then we move on in life and we try to work hard at obtaining a stable job, having good income. We work at establishing a family and raising a family. And we put in a lot of different efforts. We work hard in different facets of our life. We even work hard at trying to figure out retirement. Right? We work hard in many multiple aspects of our life, and alhamdulillah, all of that is good. All of that is necessary, and all of that is a part of our faith. But there is one ultimate effort that we work towards as well. The one that really matters the most. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about this effort, He says in the 57th chapter of the Quran in verse 21, سابقوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنات عرضها كعرض السماء والأرض. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in this verse, race and compete towards the forgiveness of your Lord. Race and compete towards the forgiveness of your Lord, and a paradise whose width is larger than the skies and the earth put together. Meaning, this reward is something you can't even fathom. You can't even understand its magnificence. And when you talk about the words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in the Quran, we all know that it's intentional, every letter, every word. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He starts this off with telling us to race and compete. What is it that someone needs to participate in a race? And this is not a race in its true sense. Because when you join a race, there's only one victor. But this is a race that is open to as many victors as there wants to be. And so, who is it that can participate in such a race? It's not somebody who has low ambition. It's not somebody who, excuse me, it's not somebody who really doesn't care much. It's really somebody who has an intent to be a part of that race. For some, being a part of that race is like motivation. For some, being part of that race is having a certain fikr, a certain worry, a concern about their eternal life. For some, they participate in this race because they have clarity in why they're here. They have a grander purpose. For some, they participate because they're willing and they understand the sacrifices that are needed in order to obtain this reward. Nevertheless, it needs something. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning in this verse. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Sabiqu, like when race and compete, in order to participate, you have to have a level of something. You don't join an effort without conscious intention. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to join this, to obtain this reward, you have to put forward something. And that something that we put forward, that energy that we put forward, those deeds that we perform, in order to do that and to do it consistently through the course of our life, there has to be a reason. There has to be motivation for some. There has to be fikr. There has to be a willingness to sacrifice. There has to be clarity of purpose. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in another verse, speaking about this race, He says, ختامه مسك وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, let the competitors compete for it. Let the competitors compete for it. It's referring to Jannah. It's referring to the rewards in paradise. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us there's a race, there's a competition. There's not only one victor. Every single one of you can be a victor. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this race has a finish line. That finish line is paradise. Because you are competing for this, paradise. And so, when we strive for excellence. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he speaks about paradise, he tells the believer, he says, when you ask Allah, don't just ask for paradise, ask for the highest levels of paradise. So there is this clarity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He encourages the reader, the believer, to recognize that there is something beyond just your existence as a Muslim. Many of us are very proud to say that we were born into this faith. Alhamdulillah. But I can tell you, and those who have accepted Islam in their life will tell you that the sweetness, that purpose that they have, we didn't necessarily come to faith with. And so this feeling, this motivation, this drive is something that we have to actually work on. And so if I have this fikr, I have this willingness, I have this innate motivation, what's next? If I understand the purpose, what's next? The Prophet ﷺ, he's with one of the young companions. And this young companion would bring water to the Prophet ﷺ when he would stay up at nighttime to pray. And the Prophet ﷺ, one time when this young companion comes to him with this water, he stops him and he asks him, what do you want? Like, tell me what you want so I can make dua for it. And this young companion, he says to the Prophet ﷺ, he says, to be in the company of you in paradise, O Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It's really incredible. If you take a pause for a moment and reflect, this young man, he's from the community of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And he has within him this awareness that there's something greater than just living life. And so when he has an opportunity to ask for whatever he wants to ask for, you don't see that he asks for a large home. You don't see that he asks for a red camel, which is like a Bentley in today's day. You don't see that he asks for like success in this life. He immediately asks for success in the hereafter. Because he knows that if you're with the Prophet ﷺ in paradise, you've made it. You've made it. So he asks the Prophet ﷺ to be in his presence. And the Prophet ﷺ, then he responds with something even more interesting, even more profound. The Prophet ﷺ, he responds to this young man and he tells him, yes, I will ask for that. But then he tells him that I also want you to help me, to help you achieve this by you praying more often. So the Prophet ﷺ, he reminds us through this experience that when you have the motivation and you want that, you have the desire for that, it still requires something. Effort. It still requires something. Effort. And the Quran speaks about success, and it's profound because the Quran, when it says success, it doesn't link our success to results. It links our success to effort. Catch that? It links our success to effort. It's a matter of performing the task. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he spoke about doing well and practicing Islam, he said it is as if you are shooting an arrow at a target. He said it's not about hitting the target. It's not about hitting the center. It's about actually making the effort to shoot the arrow. So it's a matter of effort. So when we have that fikr, we have that motivation, we have that drive, we have the awareness that this life is not the end, then it requires us to have effort, to respond with a level of energy, to do what we are supposed to do as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us. And when we talk about this effort, and a beautiful example of this effort is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. When the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he informs the companions about the different doors to Jannah. So he tells them that there is a door to enter into Jannah that is fasting. There is a door of sadaqah that you can enter into the gates of paradise. And he's talking about these different gates. And Abu Bakr, he's listening, and again you find this, the mindset of the individual, the mindset of the believer. He asks the Prophet ﷺ after he describes these doors. He asks the Prophet ﷺ, he says, is it possible that one person can enter through all the doors? He's not thinking about one door. He's not thinking, okay, sadaqah, okay, let me work on fasting. No, he has this ambition that he's like, is it possible to enter through all the doors? And the Prophet ﷺ, he responds to Abu Bakr and he says, absolutely, yes. And then the Prophet ﷺ, because of who Abu Bakr is, his desire to please Allah, his desire to be successful, the Prophet makes dua for him. And he asks that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow him to enter through all of the doors. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت وسلمت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَعَلَيْهَا مَا اكْتَسَبَتْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for every soul they have what they have earned. For every soul they have what they have earned. Both the good and the bad. And it's, the word usage we have to pay attention to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say the human. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks referring to the soul. That every human being is in charge of his soul. Like the soul is what ultimately earns. Because this body that we have, it withers away. The part of us that actually survives and moves on is the ruh, the soul. And we know very little about the soul, but we know, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that it's the soul ultimately that is collecting the good and is collecting the bad. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that every human being is in charge of his soul. Is in charge of her soul, and that she will either take their soul to destruction or will take their soul to success. Referring to what? Al-Akhirah. Because the soul is what survives, the soul is what we will be in the hereafter. And so, with this idea, with this realization that we have to have a conscious reason to participate in that race. We have to have some level of awareness and fikr and motivation. Once we have that and we put forward the effort, there are things that can get in our way. And two of the things I wanted to share with you today, of many other things, the two that I wanted to talk about today that prevent us from having that motivation, that clarity, from putting forward that effort, is two things. The first is laziness, and the second is failure to understand the realities of this life. The Prophet ﷺ, he had a set of dua, a set of supplication that he would perform every day. He would perform in the morning and he would perform in the evenings. And one of the dua that he would make, he would say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ajzi wal-kasal. Every day, the Prophet ﷺ would make dua and say, Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from disability and from laziness. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Every day, 6 times a day, he would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to prevent himself, to protect him from being lazy. That is an inherent quality that we struggle with. We call it procrastination in some ways. We call it laziness. We have different names for it. But it is something that we as human beings struggle with. And it's natural. The Prophet ﷺ, he asks Allah to protect him from laziness 6 times a day. A man who would stand up at night to pray, as we all know the stories, until his feet would swell. A man that would just sacrifice upon sacrifice upon sacrifice in order to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This man is asking for protection from laziness. How much should we be asking for protection from laziness? And how do we prevent ourselves from being lazy? Number one is the dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection. Number two is that we realize the finish line. we realize that there is something waiting for us, and that is Jannah. And lastly, we surround ourselves with those people who have that fikr, who have that motivation, who are willing to make the sacrifices. And secondly, the reality of dunya. The reality of dunya, it's so important to reflect on. Because what ends up happening is we get caught up. We get caught up in our lives, we get busy, we get lost in the glitter that we see around us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks about dunya in the Quran, He uses the term this. So, had like this thing. It's kind of similar to saying like this boy, or similar to saying like this man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He does that, He's in a way not giving it significance. You really don't even know who this little boy is, you're just boy. You don't know the name, you don't know the age, you don't know any detail. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about dunya in this kind of insignificant way. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about akhirah, you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He uses words like high and far and everlasting and respectful. And you find in that very subtle language that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us that this life, when you compare this life to the hereafter, it's a very significant difference. That this life is truly what it is, a passing, fleeting moment. And that through that, we find, really, subhanAllah, our ultimate end. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, when He speaks about al-akhirah, they say that there's about a third of the Quran directly is related to hereafter. About 1900 verses. About a third of the Quran. It's mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks about believing in Allah, oftentimes in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala attaches that with hereafter. تُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, if you should believe in Allah and the hereafter. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks about believing in Allah, oftentimes in the Quran, He says, and the hereafter. To remind that belief in the hereafter comes just after believing in Allah. And that believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without believing in the hereafter will not be useful. It will not produce that effort. And when you understand the value of dunya, then you understand when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, زُيِّنَ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, beautified for those who disbelieve is the life of this world. And this verse, it comes after a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about a people who were given evidence, who were given multiple favors, who were given opportunities upon opportunities, prophets upon prophets. He says, after that, these people are an example for you because they didn't notice, they didn't recognize. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that beautified is this world for the disbelievers. That when they didn't take advantage of that message, then they get automatically attached and caught up in the world. It's not that Allah makes it beautiful for them. No, it's that they don't realize the value, the worth of this world, and then they invest in it more than they need to. And then that takes them further and further into disbelief. And lastly, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and the worldly life is not but amusement and diversion. But the home of the hereafter is better for those who fear Allah. So will you not understand? Right? Always trying to remind the believer that this isn't it. And that's so important, subhanAllah, because we go through struggles, right? We all go through struggles. We have difficulties with different things. For some of us, it's practicing the faith. For some of us, it's indulging in substances when we shouldn't. For some of us, it's the way we interact with people in our family. For some of us, it's dealing with struggles that, like injustice that is placed upon us. We all struggle with different things. But the reality of it is, it's all temporal. It's all temporary. When we have that perspective in mind, when we realize that we are racing and competing for something that is greater than what we're dealing with today, then it helps us in keeping that struggle alive. It helps us in stopping that behavior. Even though I'm scared, I might come back to it the next day. But I put the effort forward to stop that behavior. And when we have this effort, what's next? What's the practical steps? When we say effort, what's the practical steps to actually achieving this? The Prophet ﷺ, he mentions this in a very beautiful hadith when one of the companions, who's very knowledgeable actually, he knows halal, he knows haram very well. Mu'adh, he comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, "O Prophet of Allah, give me something, tell me something that I can make it to Jannah with. Tell me something I can do." And the Prophet ﷺ, he responds to him and he tells him to do the 5 pillars. He tells him to do the 5 pillars of Islam. And then he says, the Prophet ﷺ, he continues and he tells Mu'adh, "Shall I not show you the gates of goodness?" And he tells him, fasting is a shield. He tells him that charity extinguishes sin as water extinguishes fire. And he tells him that praying in the nighttime is very special. So when you have the effort, what's the practical implementation of that effort? It's the basics, my brothers and sisters. It's the prayer, right? It's the fasting in Ramadan. It's La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, number 1. Praying, fasting. It's paying the zakat, sadaqah. It's making that hajj. It's making that pilgrimage, inshallah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the opportunity to. Not until we're like 65 and 70 and we want to save ourselves. No. Like when we have the opportunity to. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he continues and he tells him that effort, fast, give money, give from your wealth for Allah. Stand up at nighttime when no one sees you, stand up and pray. That's the implementation of what we talk about when we say effort. And as I started the khutbah, we are encouraged to do good, to work hard in this life, to put in the effort, to be successful, to have stability, right? We have to put care and concern into this world, but it needs to be put into this world and to al-akhirah respectfully. Looking at the value of al-akhirah and looking at the value of this life, dunya. And there's a very beautiful hadith that I will conclude with that really ties this together. Where the Prophet ﷺ, he says, whoever makes the hereafter his most important matter, whoever makes al-akhirah, the hereafter, his or her most important matter, Allah will settle their affairs and make this person content in their heart. And the world will come to him or her although they don't really care about it, although they don't really want it anymore. Isn't that beautiful? That the one who makes the akhirah their priority, Allah makes the world, the dunya, easy for them. Like Allah makes the world, the dunya, come towards them. Because they don't even want it anymore, but Allah makes it come to them. Because it's not, they don't hold it in their heart anymore, they hold it in their hands. But they hold al-akhirah, they hold the connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala close to the inside their heart. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the fikr, the worry, the motivation, the willingness to sacrifice for His pleasure. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us our major and minor sins. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unite our hearts. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who He is pleased with on the Day of Judgment. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who stand for good and surround ourselves with good. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us the time that we have spent today in our scale of good deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to surround us with those who remember Allah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us success in this life and in the hereafter, and to save us from the hellfire. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة.